Previously, we covered the best Link 1, 2, and 3 monsters in Yu-Gi-Oh's history, so today we'll continue that course by ranking the best Link 4 monsters of all time. Now, let's get started. Kicking off this list at number 10, we have Borrelsword Dragon. This is a Dark Dragon monster with 3000 attack. It requires 3 or more effect monsters as its Link material. Borrelsword Dragon can attack twice in one turn by, as a quick effect, swapping one monster on the field from attack position to defense position, and this effect can't be responded to. On top of that, when Borrelsword does attack another monster for the first time on a turn, it can drain the opposing monster's attack, adding half of its attack to the Borrelsword's for the rest of the turn, and halving the attack of the monster it's battling. So if Borrelsword attacks another monster at 3000 attack, Borrelsword will go up to 4500, and the other monster will go down to 1500. And finally, the card also can't be destroyed by battle. Borrelsword is a heck of a monster, designed almost explicitly to completely dominate the battle phase against basically anything that can be run over in combat. What's most notable about Borrelsword is its relatively early release and its huge power level as a one-turn kill machine. Before Borrelsword, there were some decently high-tech monsters available for Link decks, but no single cards that can almost one-turn kill on its own. The way Borrelsword's double attacking and attack boost nature works, it almost always guarantees 6000 damage by itself. On an empty board, all you need is another 2000 attack monster on your field that could have its battle position swapped, and you could attack with that monster, swap it to defense position for Borrelsword, and attack twice for 6000 damage for a lethal push. Link decks in general had increased the pace of play, and Spiral had some relatively consistent one-turn kill lines with Accesscode Talker. But Borrelsword took what Spiral could pull off in the earliest days of Link summoning and gave that one-turn kill potential to any deck that could pull off even a small amount of Link summoning. Overnight, Borrelsword's release brought Yu-Gi-Oh's speed of play directly into a 2 to 3 turn game because of just how consistently and effortlessly it let any vaguely competent strategy one-turn kill. For nearly 2 years, basically every deck that could play Borrelsword would play Borrelsword because it just eclipsed every other card and strategy when it came to purely pushing for lethal damage. From 2018 to 2020, it saw nearly as much play as the other most ubiquitous Link monster, Knightmare Unicorn, for its unique and powerful distinction as a win condition. There were calls to ban it because of just how much Borrelsword warped the speed of the game and how nearly every deck had to play it. Despite this huge impact, Borrelsword only comes in so low on this list because the power creep of modern Yu-Gi-Oh has basically given every meta-relevant archetype their own powerful one-turn kill lines, without the need for a generic Link monster who can get the job done. Doubly so because of the later release of an even more powerful monster who we'll talk about later. Though even with that power creep, you still see Borrelsword play in certain decks like Dragon Link who lock themselves in the Dragon summoning type fairly often and still want a finisher under the lock. Borrelsword still fills the niche perfectly. Suffice to say, despite its fall off in play in the modern day, Borrelsword changed the landscape of how Yu-Gi-Oh was played, and deserves plenty of respect for that. And today's video is brought to you by HelloFresh. HelloFresh has 40 weekly recipes to choose from for all meal occasions, lifestyles, and preferences. One of the many reasons why I choose HelloFresh over and over is because of how easy they make it to prepare a meal. Now, I'm not a pro in the kitchen, nor do I really care to be. So they send foolproof recipes that arrive pre-portioned and easy to prepare in just a few steps. Sometimes, when I'm slammed with work, I look to HelloFresh for multiple of my daily meals. HelloFresh is not just for dinner, they have you covered with every mealtime occasion, like snacks and easy lunches and even meals for festive gatherings. They know we're busy, so they try to take care of the meal planning and prepping, freeing up extra time in your schedule. HelloFresh makes it easy to get all my meals in throughout the day. Use my link or go to HelloFresh.com and use my code POGDuelMay16 to get 16 free meals plus free shipping. Once you click, my description will live update to count up the purchases. Now, let's get back to the video. Following up at number 9, we have Evil Twin's Trouble Sunny. This is a light fiend monster with 3300 attack and requires 2 or more monsters that includes an Evil Twin monster as its Link materials. Trouble Sunny can, as a quick effect, attribute itself to special summon up to 1 Keys to Kill monster and up to 1 Leela monster from your graveyard. While in your graveyard, you can also banish Trouble Sunny and send an Evil Twin monster from your hand, deck, or field to the graveyard, to send 1 card on the field to the graveyard. Trouble Sunny is the centralizing boss monster of the Live Twin / Evil Twin archetype. Before Trouble Sunny, Live Twins were a barely rogue control strategy revolving around Live Twin Keys to Kill and Live Twin Leela, using their on-summon effects to summon the other Live Twin from the deck to get their nifty Link 2 monsters, Evil Twin Keys to Kill and Evil Twin Leela. These two could give you targeted destruction effects and a card draw as quick effect, meaning the deck can draw 2 cards and pop a card over the course of your turn and then your opponent's. Combined with other value-generating cards like Live Twin Keys to Kill Frost, drawing a card when your opponent searches a card from the deck, which is a very common thing in Yu-Gi-Oh, and you can see how all this card advantage could pile up. The idea was to just outvalue your opponent over the course of multiple turns, as the deck lacked much of a backbone when it came to pushing for damage, and really only put up 1 interaction in the form of Evil Twin Leela's destruction effect. The deck was otherwise stuck relying on hard drawn into various hand traps thanks to its innate draw power, but then came Trouble Sunny, who completely skyrocketed the deck ceiling. Not only was it a 3300 attack boss monster, great at clearing out other problematic boss monsters who are often stuck at 3000 attack or below and usually vulnerable to being over by battle, Trouble Sunny's ability to summon the two evil twin Link monsters you would use to link off for Sunny in the first place, and then score you a non-targeting send to the graveyard removal effect was incredible, both on your turn and your opponent's. On turns 2 and later, Trouble Sunny also represented 5500 damage, counting for her 3300 attack, and the two 1100 attacks of the evil twins she can bring out in the middle of the battle phase. Trouble Sunny single-handedly took Light Twin from a completely irrelevant deck to a real meta threat, finally adding some oomph to these VTubers' bite. And at number 8 on this list, we have Topologic Zeroboros. This is a Dark Cyberus monster with 3000 attack that requires 2 or more effect monsters for its link materials. Zeroboros gains 200 attack for each banished card. It also prevents you from summoning monsters to an extra monster zone it points to with its link arrows. It has a restriction because of this next effect, where if any monster is special summoned to a zone any link monster points to, you then banish all cards on the field, including Zeroboros. Zeroboros' final effect lets you summon it from the banished zone during your standby phase if it was banished by its own effect. Topologic Zeroboros has one of the most unusual and centralizing interactions in the game. So long as you can summon a monster on your opponent's turn, you can always threaten to completely banish the entire board. In doing so, this allows you to clear your own interactions, so, outside of hand traps, once you commit to Zeroboros' board wipe, you're banking on your opponent not being able to extend on their turn. Zeroboros is usually paired with IP Masquerada as a way to both insulate it from easy removal options before you can get its banish effect off, and to not allow your opponent to trigger it preemptively if you just happen to leave it on your board on your first turn. Masquerada lets you pick when to bring Zeroboros out and set up your full board banishing. Zeroboros isn't always meta relevant, as while its effect is super powerful, it's only really good in decks that can already put up some powerful interactions before committing to it. And a board wipe isn't always the best tool depending on other decks in the format, but when it's good, it's incredibly good. It most recently saw play in Sprite and Tearlament formats. Both decks could very easily set up link plays to access it, and both notoriously can summon on your opponent's turn. Tearlament monsters do so with their graveyard effects to fusion summon, and cards like Tearlament's Halfness summon itself from the hand with its hand trap style effect, while Sprite can do it with cards like Sprite Elf and Sprite Starter. Zeroboros' ability to answer cards in the field with banishing was extremely important. A board wipe that prevented Tearlament monsters from triggering their graveyard fusion effects was like combining a Zeus together with an Abyss Dweller when it came to answering Tearlaments. And it was still good against Sprite, as it would deprive Sprite of level 2s they needed on board to extend without worrying about protection effects from IP Masquerada and Sprite Elf that other board removal interactions might falter against. Before that, it often saw play for similar reasons during any format where Orcus was prevalent. Despite the fact that Orcus has built-in ways to recycle its banished monsters, removing them without putting them in the graveyard still robbed the Orcus engine of a lot of its ability to sustain its resource loop and get value out of their many Orcus graveyard effects. It even has some fun interactions with rogue decks like Grand Maju, which would often use a danger engine to set up generic link plays and draw toward cards like Pot of Desires and Grand Maju to Isa. Zeroboros' attack boost from banished cards matches the Grand Maju game plan and was a secondary OTK tool in the deck, very easily getting above 8,000 attacks since banishing 25 cards is what the deck was designed to do. Zeroboros isn't a mainstay in every Link deck like some of the other cards on the list might be, but it is one of the highest impact effects ever printed on Link-4, and tends to make its presence known in some of the highest powered formats that need a powerful card to answer those threats. And at number 7, we have Mekk-Knight Crusadia Avramax. This is a light Cyberus monster with 3000 attack that requires 2 or more monsters summoned from the extra deck as its link materials. Avramax can't be targeted by your opponent's card effects and also prevents your opponent from targeting any monster on your side of the field for attacks besides Avramax. This is great because Avramax has a quick effect to boost its attack by the attack of any monster it's battling for that damage calculation, basically making it 3000 attack higher than anything before going back down to its regular attack power value after the damage calculation. This effect isn't even once per turn, just once per battle, so you can't force it out and then try to clear it with a second big monster. Finally, if Avramax does end up being answered and sent to the graveyard by opponent's card, you can shuffle one card in the field into the deck. As previously mentioned with Trouble Sunny, non-target removal effects from the graveyard is an incredibly powerful effect. But Avramax is a much more daunting monster in the field than Trouble Sunny as far as boss monsters go. It's incredibly hard to deal with on the field thanks to its targeting protection and near unrivaled dominance when it comes to the battle phase. And like many big Link boss monsters, it synergizes especially well with IP Masquerada. One of the few reliable ways to deal with Avramax on its own is a big sweeper style effects like Raigeki, since it can destroy Avramax without targeting and doesn't force you to commit to the board, so you can avoid Avramax's graveyard removal effect. IP Masquerada's destruction protection effect makes this a completely lacking answer. Avramax made this weight nearly comes off as an unaffected monster a lot of the times, as you basically need a non-targeting banish or spin style effect to get it off the field without facing its graveyard effect. And thanks to the aforementioned IP Masquerada, it often hits the board after you've already committed resources into dealing with your opponent's board. Avramax has seen a ton of play in nearly every Link-heavy strategy from Spiral to Orcus, as they have the easiest time fulfilling its unusual summon requirements of multiple extra deck monsters. Most recently, it's seen plenty of play in Sprite variants as a premium Masquerena option, as well as for Sprite to overcome one of its only weaknesses for a modern deck of being relatively weak when it comes to dealing with big, hard to remove monsters. Avramax is like a much more harder to deal with Borrelsword Dragon when it comes to beating over other boss monsters. It's such a beast of a boss monster that it's even seen occasional play in less Link-focused decks like Shaddolls and Paleofrogs. If you ever need a boss monster that's hard to deal with and can crash over basically any other monster in the format with ease, then Avramax is the right combination of power and accessibility in a somewhat generic Link-4 package. Next up at number 6, we have Saryuja Skuldred. This is an Earth Dragon with 2800 attack that requires 2 or more monsters with different names as its Link materials. Saryuja gets access to 3 effects depending on how many monsters you use to Link summon it. If you summon it with a bare minimum of 2 monsters, it grants any monster that's normal or special summon to a zone it points to a permanent 300 boost to both its attack and defense. If you use 3 monsters to summon it, it gains the ability to special summon a monster from your hand once per turn. Finally, if you used a full 4 monsters on its Link summon, Saryuja lets you draw 4 cards, then place 3 cards from your hand on the bottom of your deck in any order. Saryuja is not quite as ubiquitous as some of the other big Link-4 monsters on this list. It won't see play in as vast a variety of decks, and it's not a linchpin card that brings an archetype together. What Saryuja is a completely degenerate draw engine enabler that also functions as a completely generic extender because of its special summon effect. And if drawing 4 cards and special summoning monsters out of your hand wasn't degenerate enough on its own, the scariest part about Saryuja is its second and third effects are only soft ones per turns. Meaning, if you had the capability, you could draw up to 12 cards and special summon 3 monsters off of an extra deck filled with 3 Saryujas. Saryuja is a central piece to some very absurd decks and a number of different FTKs. Its ability to dig for cards and special summon was often used as a way to get cards like Cannon Soldier on the field to enable FTK loops. It was also used in every variation of deep draw danger decks that could keep producing on-field materials so long as they could keep drawing cards, something Saryuja happily enables. At 3 copies, it could even turn Slash Draw, usually a completely gimmick of a card, into a semi-consistent FTK by stacking the bottom of your deck with Slash Draws to enable the alternative win conditions and perform an entirely different kind of FTK from Cannon Soldier shenanigans. Saryuja was also a frequent inclusion in early Link-era Pendulum Magicians, thanks to those decks craving draw power to get Pendulum summoned monsters in hand, and providing the very useful 3 downward pointing Link arrows to enable big Pendulum summons. It was also one of the big culprits in getting that Grass looks greener ban, as those decks needed to convert those insane potential graveyard values that Grass can give you into cards like Fairy Tale Snow and Mizuki into real card advantage, something Saryuja was excellent at with its draw, special summon capabilities, and even its attack boost. Saryuja frequently represented 4,000 damage between its own 2,800 attack and potential 1,200 attack increase to monsters summoned to its 3 zones. While hardly a Borrelsword Dragon when it comes to lethal pushes, 4,000 damage is nothing to scoff at. Saryuja has been an integral piece to a lot of various competitive decks over the years. While there's a lot of boss monsters in the Link-4 slot, there's really no comparable monster to Saryuja when it comes to draw power, giving it a unique place amongst the other powerful Link-4s. And next up at number 5, we have Knightmare Gryphon. This is a Light Fiend monster with 2,500 attack that requires 2 more monsters with different names as its Link material. Gryphon's first effect is when you Link summon, you can discard 1 card to set 1 spell trap from your graveyard to your field, but you can't activate it the same turn it's set. If Gryphon is co-linked, you can also draw a card when you do this. Its second effect is all special summon monsters in the field cannot activate their effects unless they're linked, which includes Knightmare Gryphon itself. Knightmare Gryphon stands out as another fairly unique Link-4 monster for a simple reason. It's the Floodgate King. Built into Knightmare Gryphon is an already powerful Floodgate style effect that punishes your opponent if they're not strictly on a deck that can get some Link arrows on the field, functioning as a one-sided skill drain since obviously the deck running Knightmare Gryphon has Link arrows to play with to avoid its effect. More importantly though, is Knightmare Gryphon's ability to dredge up a spell or trap from the graveyard. While preventing you from activating the card the turn you set it stopped Knightmare Gryphon from being unbelievably abusable, as being able to activate a spell card in the same turn would break it in an untold number of ways. Nothing stops you from grabbing any trap card you put into your graveyard, setting it, and just flipping it on your opponent's turn. Knightmare Gryphon's usual partner in crime was Curious the Lightsword Dominion. A problematic card in its own right, Curious could let you mill any trap of your choice from your deck and get you most of the way to Gryphon's Link Summoner requirement to boot. Early on in its lifespan, this would be frequently used to set up the, at the time legal, Imperial Order. But even once Imperial Order was banned, people found other great cards. Spiral and Danger decks had the easiest time accessing both Curious and Gryphon and would frequently set up Anti-Spell Fragrance or Appointer the Red Lotus as incredibly powerful trap cards to disrupt your opponent's ability to play. More recently, Danger Tearlament's decks would go even further and use this setup on the deck's natural milling power to set up some of their own archetypal traps like Tearlament Suliac and Tearlament's Crime that they milled, or more dangerously, to get access to Eradicator Epidemic Virus. Two Elements was powerful enough that decks needed big Haymaker board breaker cards like Dark Ruler No More to contest it, and Eradicate Epidemic Virus squashed those while also tearing out other important spell cards from your opponent. Floodgates or Floodgate adjacent cards are often the name of the game in Yu-Gi-Oh, as they're some of the hardest effects to play around. When it comes to Link-4s and Link monsters in general, nothing compares Knightmare Gryphon when it comes to floodgating your opponent out of the game. If it weren't for the banning of Curious, it might still be seen play right now. And taking the number 4 spot on this list, we have Apollousa, Bow of the Goddess. This is a Wind Fairy monster that requires 2 more monsters of different names, not including tokens, as its link materials. Apollousa's original attack is equal to the number of monsters used as its link materials times 800. Once per chain, Apollousa can reduce its attack by the same 800 increment to negate a monster effect your opponent activates. Because of the lack of a hard once per turn on its negation effect, you're only allowed to control one Apollousa at a time. Apollousa is, bar none, the most highly played Link boss monster ever. Negation effects are very hard to come by on Link monsters. For the first 2 years of Link era, the best negation that pure Link decks had access to were weirdly specific cards like Accesscode Talker, with its targeting negation, or the incredibly high investment Tri-Gate Wizard, with an Omni negate so long as you could perform an absurd co-link setup. Apollousa simplified and power crept all of them. If you can get 4 monsters with different names on the field, Apollousa is going to give you 4 monster effect negates. Simple, straightforward, and absurdly powerful. Basically, every deck that has a Link summon component to it and didn't lock itself into a specific summon limitation has to run Apollousa. Monster negates tend to be the most valuable, as Yu-Gi-Oh has been a monster effect centric game for a long time now. Apollousa is an insanely good value on its investment, as getting to multiple monster negates in basically any other strategy would require significantly more investment than 2 to 4 monsters that Apollousa does. Apollousa is synonymous with the latter half of the Link dominant era of Yu-Gi-Oh! It was the go-to endboard piece for the second coming of Spiral, Adamantimators, Dangers, and all the variants of Pendulum decks that loved it for its downward pointed arrows. And that's ignoring the literally dozens of different strategies that tossed in Apollousa because it was just so powerful and so easy to summon. Despite its power level and ease of use, Apollousa is not without its weaknesses. It wasn't uncommon for a lone Apollousa to use up a negate or 2 and be subject to its low attack stat, making it incredibly easy to clear in battle to free up the rest of your opponent's turn. So while Apollousa could sometimes win you the game on its own with its rapid fire negations, it wasn't usually ideal as a singular game-winning card. Apollousa was the best at being a centerpiece of an end board that had other interactions to complement and protect Apollousa's dominance against monster effects. Still, that's a relatively minor weakness for such a powerful and easy to access monster. If you play a Link deck, you're likely playing Apollousa. It's just too good not to. And at number 3 on this list, we have Accesscode Talker. This is a Dark Cyberus monster with 2300 attack that requires 2 or more effect monsters as its link materials. Your opponent cannot activate any cards or effects in response to any of Accesscode Talker's effects. If you link summon Accesscode Talker, then you have a gain attack equal to 1000 times the link rating of one of the monsters used as link materials. So if you used a Link 3 monster, it would gain 3000 attack, putting it at 5300 attack. You can also banish 1 Link monster from your field or graveyard to destroy 1 card your opponent controls. But you can only banish once per attribute in a turn, meaning you can't banish 2 dark monsters and each subsequent banish must be of a different attribute. Now, Accesscode Talker is the sole reason why Borrelsword Dragon isn't in this exact spot on this list. Accesscode took the crazy high bar that Borrelsword Dragon set up as a game-finishing behemoth and shattered it. While Borrelsword often represents a bit more damage than Accesscode Talker, absolutely nothing it does make up for the fact that Accesscode Talker is a 1-card board annihilating machine. Its ability to not only just destroy cards, but to do so without targeting and without your opponent being able to chain their own monster effects and negate it, makes it the pinnacle board clearing tool not just amongst Link 4s, but amongst basically all generic extra deck monsters in the history of the game. A fairly common setup for Accesscode Talker is with its synergies with the Knightmare monsters. Frequently, Link climbing decks will start off its board breaking turn with a Knightmare Phoenix to clear out a back row, followed by Link climbing a Knightmare Unicorn to spin away anything that might have a destruction protection, and finally Link climb into a 5300 attack Accesscode Talker to clear out the rest of the board, while representing a ton of damage. Another huge leg up Accesscode had that pushed it ahead of Borrelsword is the fact that it only needs 2 monsters for its materials instead of 3, making it play nicely with more various Link strategies and especially the ever-present Knightmare Unicorn. Accesscode is to Link 4s what Knightmare Unicorn is to Link 3s. You just play it. It's too good not to. It even has incidental synergies with cyber strategies, as it combos incredibly well with Update Jammer and Transcode Talker, who can combine to give Accesscode Talker 2 attacks at 5300 attack each. This gives it more damage potential than Borrelsword can ever usually put out, further eclipsing Borrelsword's one upside in specific strategies. Much like Apollousa, we would be here all day just listing off the dozens of different decks and strategies that may have made use of Accesscode Talker. This card, alongside its Knightmare friends, single-handedly power crept the entire concept of break-in boards with just regular engine and not having to rely on Haymaker main deck cards. Accesscode Talker is synonymous with the speed and power of Yugioh accelerating to nearly unreasonable heights. So long as a card like Accesscode Talker is around, you can never be confident a game of Yugioh can or should go more than 2 turns. It's just that good at its job. And taking the number 2 spot, we have Topologic Gumblar Dragon. This is a Dark Cyberus monster with 3000 attack that requires 2 or more effect monsters for its link materials. Gumblar Dragon is similar to the aforementioned Topologic Zeroboros, in that all the Topologic monsters trigger some kind of effect when a monster is summoned to a zone that a link monster is pointing to. When that happens with Gumblar, you discard 1 or 2 random cards from your hand. Then your opponent discards the same number. Following up on those hand rips, during your main phase, if Gumblar is extra linked, which means you have co-links set up connecting 1 extra monster zone to the other, you can make your opponent discard 1 or 2 cards and inflict 3000 damage to them if they have no cards left in hand. And you can only use 1 effective Gumblar per turn and only once per turn. Topologic Gumblar Dragon is perhaps a card on this list that, when you read it, makes you think, how the heck did they ever let this card get printed? It's a hand-ripping machine, very easily snatching 2 cards out of your opponent's hand on your turn, whether with its first effect or with its extra linked effect. Then repeating the 2-card discard on their turn by setting up a special summon to a link zone. It didn't help that, back when Gumblar was legal, it was still Master Rule 4, and extra linking completely locked your opponent out of the extra deck if done correctly. Topologic Gumblar Dragon, while available to a few decks in a short lifespan, was synonymous with Goki. Goki was a link spam machine that could easily climb into Gumblar thanks to its warrior-centric extenders like Isolde and other powerful link and draw engines like the Sky Striker engine, which also provided link materials thanks to Sky Striker Mecha Hornet drones. One of the minor limitations on Gumblar is that it was frequently ripping cards out of your own hand, but Goki barely cared about that, as the process of link climbing to Gumblar, every Goki would float into another Goki, completely mitigating any real cost of the self-discards. A card like Confiscation is banned for the fact that it rips 1 card out of your opponent's hand, and while it does have the benefit of letting you see their hand to pick the best choices, Gumblar's ability to nuke 4 cards means you're probably going to hit the best cards in their opening hand regardless, and 3 more to boot, making it closer to 2 resolutions of another banned card, Delinquent Duo. It's just too easy to use too. While the extra link setup was the usual goal of Gumblar, nothing really prevents you from just using its effect that triggers on summon to a link zone to discard 2 cards on both turns as well. It's still ripping 4 cards from your opponent's hand and leaving a giant monster in their field for them to answer. Gumblar Dragon was nearly responsible for a second Tier 0 format. As clearly the most powerful thing in the metagame, though the odd anti-meta Sky Striker or Trickstar deck or the Last Breaths of Spiral or various FTK strategies kept Goki just out of that vaunted Tier 0 placement. Gumblar is patently absurd and should never have been printed, and perhaps the funniest thing about it is that the original anime version of the card was even better. The first discard effect destroyed all cards in both players' hands, and the extra link effect destroyed all cards on just your opponent's hand and couldn't be negated. They drastically reduced its power level when porting it to the real game, and it was still one of the most degenerate monsters that created one of the most degenerate formats of all time. It should come as no surprise that Topologic Gumblar Dragon barely survived more than half a year after its release before taking a likely permanent residence on the ban list. There were a few cards in the history of Yugioh that compare to Gumblar in just how much it dominated a metagame, though there is one more Link-4 that does contest it. And finally, taking number 1 spot on this list, we have Pre-Errata Firewall Dragon. This is a light Cyberus monster with 2500 attack that requires 2 more monsters as its materials. Once, while face up on the field, Firewall can return any number of monsters from the field or graveyard to the hand equal to the number of monsters co-linked to it. Before its errata, its second effect stated that if a monster Firewall was pointing to with its link arrows was destroyed by battle or sent to the graveyard, you could special summon 1 monster from your hand. While Topologic Gumblar Dragon might have defined a half year's worth of Yugioh with its absurd hand-ripping effect, even Gumblar formats were also defined by Firewall Dragon. Firewall Dragon's absolutely trivial summoning conditions and powerful special summoning effect with no once per turn on it meant that nearly every viable deck played it while it was legal, because to be playing anything else meant you were likely losing. Firewall's original effect turned every subsequent link summon into a free special summon. Originally, Spyro broke this card first, as the deck has incredibly robust link summoning capabilities and special summon cards like Spyro Quick Fix and Spyro Master Plan from the hand, at the cost of doing the link summons you wanted to do anyways, occurring more card advantage than was ever reasonable. But as more and more link monsters and link-centric archetypes released, Firewall escalated as a problem. In the Goki Gumblar format, Firewall Dragon was the easiest way to capitalize on the Goki's floating whenever you link them off, letting you special summon all the extra Goki monsters you were adding to your hand. Though Gumblar would still remain a problem for a full format after Firewall's eventual banning. But Firewall made extra linking with Gumblar a common sight while both were legal together. Part of the reason Gumblar, despite its insane effect, wasn't a strictly tier 0 strategy was that as more powerful link monsters like Curious and Saryuja were released, Firewall would be the backbone of consecutive FTK style formats in various danger and dark warrior strategies that could deep draw 2 or directly mill FTK enablers alongside cards like Curious. Hand looping was good and all, but FTKing your opponent was even better. Firewall's special summon enabling even combined nicely with its first effect, as while it can be used as a point of interaction on your opponent's turn, the ability to bounce a monster from your own graveyard to your hand and then immediately special summon that monster with Firewall Dragon made cheating out basically any monster plainly easy. Part of what made Firewall Dragon so impactful was its status as an anime ace monster and the front-facing symbol of the new Link era. This led to Konami avoiding a well-deserved ban on it for far too long, leaving arguably the most powerful extract monster of all time legal for over 2 years, despite it dominating every single format it was part of. Firewall Dragon has a distinction of not just being arguably the most powerful monster in the history of the game, but thanks to outside circumstances, it was able to lord this power level over 6 consecutive formats, and leave a mark in Yu-Gi-Oh's history far larger than nearly any other card that wasn't released before Synchro Summoning was a concept. It's such a big deal and was so broken that it was one of the few cards to eventually receive an errata, fixing the most broken aspect of it by limiting it to once per turn special summon of a Cyberse monster, hamstringing it into a much more playable version and letting Konami finally have their Link mascot back in the game. There are many, many broken cards in Yu-Gi-Oh's history, and Pre-Errata Firewall Dragon stands near the top of that list. Alright, and that's the list. Are there any other Link-4 monsters you think deserve to be on this list? Do you have any ideas or other topics you'd like me to cover? If so, leave those suggestions down below in the comments.